Welcome to Disruptive Successor, a show for next generation leaders in family businesses and entrepreneurs who want to disrupt the status quo and take their existing business to a whole new level. We all know that what got us here isn't going to get us there. This show will provide inspiration, advice, and resources to help you create massive impact. This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Hi, Jonathan Goldhill here. Welcome back to another episode of the Disruptive Successor Show. Today's guest is Dave Specht. He is the author of The Family Business Whisperer, and he currently serves as the director of the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management here in Los Angeles. Dave's personal mission is to preserve families and perpetuate businesses. He is married, has 6 children, and lives in Washington State. So prior to joining the Drucker School, Dave helped develop the Family Dynamics program at Wells Fargo Private Bank. And prior to that, had a family business consulting firm and developed the Family Business program at the University of Nebraska. Dave, thanks for joining me here today.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Awesome. So great to have another family business person here in Southern California. We need more family business programs. Dave, controversial question. Why do family businesses matter? I mean, why should we care about family businesses versus just businesses?
Well, I guess it's a two-part question for me, Jonathan. One is, why does the family matter? And I feel like families matter because they are the most important unit of society. And I think businesses matter because they're the engine of driving that economy, whether locally or globally. And so when you add those two together, the family unit and the business, it matters. And so there's a lot of complexity when you put those two words together, and some of that complexity is what makes it interesting.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I have this podcast, and I've been on another podcast, Mike Boyd's podcast, called The Business of Family. Mm-hmm. And so he approaches things from like the family first. And so some family business consultants focus on family first as the conversation starter, and some focus on business first as the conversation starter. Tell us a little bit about your consulting practice that you had. What was your focus in that practice?
Sure. So my focus is on the preservation of the family unit and the perpetuation of the business. That doesn't mean that the business is a secondary focus. It just means that I need people to realize how hard it is to rebuild family relationships, and that they take that as seriously as growing and perpetuating their business. So my focus in my consulting work is really about trying to find a common goal and a common vision. The reason that family businesses succeed across generations is because there is a shared passion for something, shared passion for an industry. If they don't have that shared passion, it's really hard for them to succeed. And so, a big part of what I did was help create expectations. There's expectations are being created, Jonathan, whether we inform those expectations or not. And so I try to get families to be intentional about putting those expectations on the table. What are the expectations on the rising generation to come back? Is there an expectation to come back? If there is there an expectation that a job will be made for them, or will they apply for a job that's open? And so as we look at, the challenges that families face that are in business together, the biggest problem is with managing, or the mismanagement of expectations. And so spend a lot of time on that.
And so I'm sure that you dealt a lot with parenting, talking to parents who are experiencing prosperous times with their company, and dealing with the next gen leaders who are coming up, who maybe feel entitled to either a certain pay or a certain position. How have you helped families in that regard, or what advice could you give families who are dealing with that? What's some good generic sort of like, these are things to look at, or to look for, and and how do we address those?
Yeah. Well, I wrote an article not too long ago. It's called Entitlement Begins with Me. And it's for parents. And really, I was writing it for myself, Jonathan. I have 6 kids, and no child is born entitled. They are taught to be entitled. And so if you hear me complaining about my entitled kids, you need to ask me, what choices are you making as a parent that's leading to that entitlement? And one of the things that I see often, Jonathan, with business owning families and just busy people that are very successful, is that oftentimes we overcompensate for the time that we've spent away from our kids, building our business, chasing our own dreams, and we compensate with things, or we compensate with money. And oftentimes that has a negative side effect to perpetuating the most important thing, which is our values.
Yeah.
You take a family that is successful in a business. Typically, there's grit. There's resilience in that first generation. Well, as a parent that is trying to overcompensate for being gone, or for working so hard, I may rob them of the opportunity of inheriting that grit, or developing that grit, because I paved the path for them too easily. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does. I want to dive into this. I think it's a very interesting subject, because I have noticed that most of my clients were probably raised a little bit more in the family business. They were, if it was a construction company, they were going around in the truck with their dad. And I'm talking about as an 8, 10, 12, 14, 16-year-old. I had a woman on my show recently who was, it was a mason. It runs a masonry company, and she remembers bringing her roller skates to the job sites and doing, like, if there was a pool or whatever that was a walkway, she was roller skating at the job site. So she was observing that. And then let's take by contrast the other end of the spectrum. Anyone who's seen the TV series on HBO called Succession, which seems to be loosely based on the Murdoch family and family business empires. The entitlement is so disgusting and filthy in that family. It's so repugnant. But it seems as though that entitlement was learned a little bit from the dad, where your question, what was the article again?
Entitlement begins with me.
Yeah, it seems like the father figure was, even though he made it and he was successful, he felt entitled to just be able to be an asshole, if you'll excuse my language. And then he taught that same behavior, and it was worse in the kids.
Well, the entitlement goes even farther, though, Jonathan. If you're successful, you feel entitled to buy whatever you want, whether it's for yourself or for your kids. You feel entitled to fly private.
Right.
Great. You can do those things, but there are consequences to those choices. Not necessarily. I mean, flying private is not bad, but your kids only flying private is creating an expectation for them, a lifestyle expectation that is going to leave them a little bit entitled to whatever lifestyle you provided for them. And the scariest thing for me, Jonathan, is that, the rising generation, as they follow in prosperous footsteps, they may not ever be able to have the standard of living that their parents created for them, independent of their parents. And to me, that's the trickiest part.
It's really damaging. As someone who inherited some wealth when I was in my 20s, And son took control over it because my grandfather was somewhat senile, and I had moved to the West Coast in search of my own freedom in life, and thought, well, I just want to get control over this money. I mean, it, there was something that was just so missing in that because I didn't have a father who blocked that and who was constructive. But yeah, I think entitlement is a really interesting topic, and a lot of it is how you relate to the money and relate to things. As you were just talking about, this entitlement, I think, the worst form of character, maybe in terms of family, is a man, and I'm saying this as if it couldn't be a woman, but a man who betrays his marital oath and has affairs and feels entitled to it because he's wealthy and successful and can do that. But he's sort of like betrayed a trust. And then, children, nothing gets by children. They see that. So I just like that series Succession, which brought family business in the forefront to people who watch, HBO and are interested in the entertainment industry, was really like everything not to do, like how to do everything wrong.
Jonathan, I mean, if you think of any reality TV show that's had any success, they're all based on family business.
Yeah, really.
I mean, all of them.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the struggle between founder and next and Gen 2 or successor and Gen 3. Both of them have different dynamics. I've consulted with them with both. The issue of continuity versus control. It seems really difficult, and I talk about this in my book. It seems difficult for founders to let go and to trust the next gen. But it's also difficult sometimes for the next gen to take the chip off their shoulder, be humble and appreciative, and contribute and demonstrate value. I'm sure you dealt with this quite a bit in your consulting practice. What are some of your thoughts on this issue of continuity versus control? Like what are questions that you ask people when you were consulting them, maybe?
Yeah, I mean, it is a big issue, and oftentimes I'm brought in to help put a succession plan in place, a management succession plan, an ownership succession plan. And it's one of the first questions that I ask, are you more interested in continuity or control? And ultimately, if you have a senior generation that can't let go, is not allowing the next generation to rise, to take on meaningful obligations, responsibilities, make decisions, take financial risk, then ultimately you are interested more in control. And until you can release some of that control, I'm not going to allow you to pretend that continuity is important. Now, in the name of protecting your kids and not allowing them to make too big of decisions and not kill the business, you're saying that you're interested in continuity and you're providing those guardrails. But ultimately, unless you start to give up control and allow for others to make decisions, I'm not going to let you talk about continuity being priority number one. You're interested in control. As far as the rising generation, I'm trying to figure out, how do we get them to think and act like an owner as early as possible? And I'll give you an example. Working with a large farm family in the Pacific Northwest, and they were trying to figure out, is my next generation ownership material,
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the kids had been in the business for 5 years. They wanted to start to pass control, but they wanted to test into this ownership piece. And so I encouraged them to give him part or piece of the farm to run, cut his salary in half, and let him participate in the up or the down of the farm. First of all, the conversation about that being the setup is going to be a litmus test if he really wants to be an owner or not. Because people say they want to be an owner, but really what they want is they want the success part, but not the responsibility.
Yep.
And so oftentimes I'm focused on the rising gen figuring out what does it really mean to be an owner? How do I start to feel what owners feel? And as soon as they can do that, then the senior generation will be much more likely to give them decisions, because their decision-making ability and authority, because they're fully aligned. And I think alignment is a key concept.
I think that's a great illustration of a way to go about transferring some of the power and ownership and testing the next gen. And so one of the things in my book I talk about is I have the 7 P's framework, and I talk about the 1 P being product or service, and the requirement or it's not so much a requirement, but there's an imposition put on the next gen to come up with an improvement to the product or service or the process by which it's made or delivered, somehow an improvement. And while I'm not an expert in farms, I could imagine the next gen might be thinking about things that the previous gen didn't have to think about, like availability. I mean, water's probably always been an issue with farming, but there's lots of technologies, it seems to me, that have come into play on, more efficient watering and irrigation. We see changes in plants and crops. For instance, as marijuana becomes illegal, probably more people have moved into that business than any other crop, I imagine, over the last few decade.
Well, you think about it, Jonathan, you think about it like, how well do they take care of the equipment? How much are they watching the other employees and paying attention to the way that they're treating equipment and the buildings and things like that? As soon as they're on the line, then they start to pay attention. And it's not
those are
finger. It's just, that's just nature for us.
Right. And those are timeless things that make good sense. And the next gen who grew up maybe being spoiled by the previous gen or being protected from having to make those, develop that grit, this tests them in a really positive way. And so I think that's great. It's really challenging.
Let me give you one other tip.
Yeah.
So if families are thinking about making gifts, and if part of that gift is ownership in the family business, I encourage them to gift part of the leverage. Allow them to personally guarantee some of that note, and I encourage them to ask them, hey, we think we want to have you kids inherit this together, but we do have these debt obligations. How do you feel about inheriting those as well? Again, another litmus test, Jonathan, to see who really wants to be an owner and who is really most interested in just the success along the way. So I think it's important to find those little points in time where you can really test into, do they really understand what ownership is?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I have a partnership questionnaire I've been using since 1991, and it even asks questions like, well, so what happens if one partner has to put up their indebtedness, or has a better credit score and the other one doesn't? I mean, one has to personally guarantee the line of credit, and the other ones, they don't have any net worth. Like, so how do you then deal with ownership and division? Let's talk about families where there's maybe 6 kids like yours, and let's say 3 of them are interested in the business and 3 of them are not. Mm-hmm. What obligation, what responsibility, what conversations should be had between the parents and the next gen about, hey, here's how this is going to work. The 3 that are interested in the business, this is what we're going to do. I mean, these are difficult questions for parents.
Yeah, they are. They are, because they're wearing multiple hats, Jonathan. So they're wearing the parent hat, but they're wearing the business owner hat as well. And, if you were to flip the script on them to say, as a parent, if you had to inherit this with 3 non-operating shareholders, how would this have gone for you?
Good question.
And ultimately, there gets to be a little reality there. Shared ownership is the hardest thing you can ask anyone to do. And I think it's really a conversation around, if you want the business to continue, what does the structure need to look like for it to have a great opportunity to be possible? And can it sustain 3 non-operating shareholders that have dividend needs or dividend desires?
Right.
I've worked with countless ranchers, really large ranches in Nebraska, and they're notorious for never paying dividends.
Yeah.
So why would you want to be a non-operating shareholder for a massive ranch that doesn't ever pay dividends? They would rather buy iron, buy equipment that they don't even need than pay taxes or pay dividends. So, those are some of the conversations.
Yeah. Again, because it's been a year of so many Netflix movies and TV shows. Yellowstone was a great series about a rancher, Kevin Costner, and his children, who were trying to either protect him or take the ranch out from underneath him. And, the ranch was losing money year after year. It was an interesting story. So highly recommend watching it. Yeah, these are challenging issues. And look, if you've got $6 million in combined assets between the business and the real estate, and business is half of it, it seems like that's an easy answer, but life is never that simple. And so it takes shining some light and having conversations around this. What do you see some of the challenges with the rising gen and demonstrating their valuableness to or their usefulness to the parents? And also, like, how have you dealt or helped companies maybe where one child is more valuable and functional, and another one's maybe not so functional, maybe even getting in trouble? Have you had situations where you've counseled folks like that?
Yeah, for sure. And as a university professor, I used to always ask my students this question. Tell me why is your business, your family's business, more valuable for you being there than not?
Wow.
And I would tell them, if you can't square your shoulders and have your head up and answer that question with some confidence, you're not ready to go back to the family business. Because ultimately, returning to the family business, they're going to be held to a higher standard from all non-family employees. The assumption is that they were given something for nothing. And unless they are ready to prove that they do bring unique value, that they are worth what the company pays them, then it's going to be a tough time for them.
Yeah.
The other part of this is compensation, and compensation issues in family business is really a huge thing. Oftentimes, I call this the peanut butter and jelly sandwich syndrome. And I have a mother-in-law, bless her heart, who is fantastic, and she has 8 kids. And if there were 2 pieces of bread and some peanut butter and jelly, she would figure out exactly how that need to be cut so that each of them could get exactly the right portion. Well, compensation in a family business, it can't be treated like that. I personally believe that we need to pay market wages for the job they're hired to do. And if we don't do that, then we're confusing that rising generation that they're either worth more or they're worth less than what the job function is. If you want to give them money, call it a gift.
Yep.
But don't confuse their compensation and either inflate their ego by paying them way more than the job is worth, or beat them down and pay them way less and say, with a promissory IOU, someday, honey, this will all be yours. So, that compensation conversation is a big one, Jonathan.
100%. And I say the same thing. And I give people look, you want to give yourself a 5% over market bump. It's a small percentage. We can go with that, but it's got to be in alignment with what's out there, what the going rate is. And you can use websites like salary.com or Glassdoor to research what other comparable companies in a similar industry, maybe in a similar geography, are paying people. So definitely a smart move. Let's talk about the family that has a secret estate plan or has secrets that they don't share equally among family members. Maybe there's not exactly like children, but there's cousins or, your brothers or nephews and nieces in the business. And there's kind of unspoken estate planning conversation. There's a lack of conversation. And so what happens is that people get tied up in knots around this kind of unspoken conversation. And they hang around thinking that maybe they're entitled to this, and they don't really know exactly what the plan is.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to talk to my families about, expectations, and those expectations are being created, whether connected to truth or not. And so why not inform those expectations, and whether it's expectation for inheritance, expectation for leadership, expectation for, shared ownership or not, and one of the things that I do is try to help them discover, because oftentimes they're focused on the riskiness of the conversation. This is risky. I don't want to have, this kind of bad feelings or whatever. And so we try to walk through what is the real risk? What's the biggest risk of them not knowing? And just list some of those things out. And what's the biggest risk of them knowing the truth of the situation? And ultimately, if they can go down that path and figure out that it's actually riskier for people to have expectations that are not aligned with reality than it is to have maybe some uncomfortable conversations, but at least for people to know where they stand. And so that's just, that's pretty basic, but something we need to do.
What are now you wrote a book, and let's talk. I don't know how many years ago you wrote the book, but The Family Business Whisperer. In addition to your book, what are some go-to books, movies, TED Talks? Like as a consultant, what are some of your go-to resources for families? Maybe they're case studies, maybe they're Harvard Business Review case studies. What are things that if, you could share with our listeners that would be really valuable for them to raise their awareness and consciousness around this?
Sure. Well, if you are floating around on the channels, just put a family business lens on, and you'll start to see that basically any reality TV show is about family business. And why do they do that? Because there's oftentimes drama, and there's challenge, and there's conflict, and it's Hollywood's figured out how to make an easy easy feature.
So let's dissect that. I raised my daughter in Calabasas, which after a few years I started calling it Kardashianville, because that's the home of the Kardashian family. And now that you make that point, there's so much drama in that family, and look at how they've capitalized on it. It's amazing. But where else do we see that? What other reality TV shows should we be looking at and seeing some of the same drama? Okay.
Oh, I mean, Crocodile Hunters, Duck Dynasty is a positive one. On and on and on. I mean, I don't know all of them. I don't watch a lot of them, but if you look around, but I mean, family business and some of the concepts of family business have been around forever. Mm-hmm. I mean, you look at, even Lion King. Let's go very, very basic.
Okay.
Just can't wait to be king. I mean, that's a succession story right there.
Right.
And so, I guess everything for me looks like family business, because I'm just living in this family business world.
I get it. Look, I watched a movie just last night called White Tiger, and now I understand it's a movie about the two different castes in India, and the lower caste wants to work for the upper caste and is willing to become a servant of his family. And he keeps saying that, my wish is to serve your family, because your family is like my family. They're better than my family. So it's very interesting. Does family business create a lot of jealousy for people? I mean, I grew up in I didn't grow up in a family business. My family's business was very successful, and it afforded me a lot of what I call privilege early in life. Do you think family businesses create a lot of jealousy for people who haven't been born into that with the silver spoon in their mouth, or that, that great fortune.
So the question is, are people jealous of those that come from family business?
Are people who are not in family businesses looking at family businesses with some envy? And maybe the envy might be over, wow, look at how rich they are. Or the envy might be, oh, you didn't really have to think about what career you're going to go into. Your family had such a successful business, or even, or your family is so functional that I'm envious of your family that,
Yeah, the envy comes from poor assumptions.
Yeah.
And not really knowing people, but it's real. It's out there. I know young kids that deal with bullying and deal with just harassment around the success of their parents' business. Well, they didn't have anything to do with that. They just grew up in the house, right? And it goes even to, picking up the bill at, you're out with your friends and, well, you're good for it. Your parents got a lot of money. So
right.
There's a lot of challenges in growing up in a successful family that, most of the world doesn't have a lot of empathy for, but they have some unique challenges for sure.
Well, and I think I think the data proves out, although I'm not good at citing statistics, maybe you can help me here, but the data proves out that family businesses are more successful by and large than non-family businesses. So, and I'm, forget about the Facebooks and Amazons and Netflix and, Googles of the world that became unicorns and grew to $1 billion, $1 trillion market caps. Most businesses are family businesses, and they're more successful, and they struggle to make it into the third and fourth generation, either because they don't keep up with the changes in innovation, or because of entitlement and, a lack of interest, or, maybe just the industry, the company hasn't upgraded and is in an industry that was good, 30, 40 years ago, but isn't relevant as much today. And so they haven't innovated. So I think it's a very interesting dynamic. Maybe that's why mainstream doesn't focus so much on family businesses. They're not so interested, but I think let's go back to your original point. Family is what matters and comes first. Yeah. Businesses are formed by families who the family is the original economic unit. Yeah. And then the business is formed to sustain the family, which then in turn hires other people and other families.
Well, mostly I think with family businesses, they don't get a lot of attention because a lot of their capital is patient capital and it's long-term in nature. And those don't make great stories all the time.
Right.
The meteoric rise from zero are the stories that, we like to hear, the garage story.
Yeah.
Well, most family businesses started there. They may not stay in the garage, but, the long-term, continuing to innovate, but maybe it's not a huge splash innovation, those stories aren't always as interesting. Now I'm going to try to change that, because at the Drucker School, we're connected with some families that are amazing with regards to some of the innovations. And I'm just learning about some of them. So I don't have a lot of examples to give you right now, but I hope to change some of the narrative with the public and how they feel about family businesses, because they are innovative, they are resilient, but they do face unique challenges.
I think that'll be very interesting, and I welcome you to Los Angeles and to making a big splash with the Global Family Business Institute at Drucker School of Management. I was reading Reid Hoffman's book. I think it's called Blitzscaling, and I got about halfway through it, and then I just it was like a movie where I just said, I don't care anymore about the characters in this book. Like, my clients are never going to be the next Airbnb or the next LinkedIn or the next, they're not going to be rocket ships to the moon type of companies. They're slower in growth. They don't take outside capital. I guess because they'd have to give up equity, and the families want to control the equity. So it's patient capital, it's home equity loans, it's, borrow off your credit cards, it's, reach out to your uncle. And that's most of America.
It is.
So, so I think those are the interesting stories. And if you can tell those stories, I salute you. Let me ask you a question about governance. When should a family business start to think in terms of putting some governance principles in? That's a strange and foreign word to most of my clients who are just first and second generation family members.
Yeah.
Is this just when now multi-generations are coming in place? Can you help us out with this?
Yeah, when you think of the word governance, I would just think of decision-making protocols.
Okay.
So when multiple generations are involved in decisions together, they need rules to the road. Okay, so you think about the founder generation, they don't have to ask anyone. They make the decision. Okay, then you start sharing ownership between two generations. Now it's, typically the senior or the rising generation is deferring to the senior generation on those decisions. Then you get to shared ownership within that second generation. Now we have some challenges with, okay, are we going to decide to grow this company? Are we going to decide to, up our lifestyle? Are we going to try to buy out our siblings that are not in the business? And so, there's some interesting dynamics that go along with governance. And there's pieces of governance like, employment policies. When you get to that third generation and there's cousins upon cousins that might be interested in working for the business, well, there needs to be some rules to the road. What are the expectations for a family member to work in the business? And so we help families to, put some of those protocols together so that it depersonalizes the know, basically, that every family member can work in the business if, whenever and however they want.
Yeah.
So multiple generations, I would say, and when they're forced into starting to make decisions together and when they start to take risk together, there needs to be some structure in place.
I think that's really good. So my greatest hope when I'm working with a family business is that they're a high functioning family. And my greatest fear is that they're going to be a dysfunctional family and that I have to play more therapist. And I was raised by a therapist and I've been in therapy for many years because I really believe in personal growth. But one of my only tools in my tool bag is like Harville Hendrix's Imago therapy, which is basically kind of a role playing, like come over to my country and this is what my world looks like from this seat. And then you do this kind of get to communicate with the other person and understand them a little bit better. But that's a really challenging situation when there's dysfunction in a family. So I sometimes
I've never met a family that didn't have dysfunction.
I know, but I always think
not even my own.
Of course. I mean, it's inherent. I just sometimes think, God help me when I get into those situations.
Yeah. And truly, I mean, we just have to be able to have our eyes wide open to see, what kind of things do they need and are we equipped? I mean, I think it's really crucial that we stay within our wheelhouse.
Yes.
And bring in experts, because if you're dealing with substance abuse issues or you're dealing with, physical abuse or, mental health issues, those need to be treated with real professionals that are doing just those things. And all of those things will slow a succession process down, but ultimately they need to be addressed.
Yeah. Great. Hey, Dave, thanks for this freewheeling conversation. I'm sure we'll continue it. If listeners want to get a hold of you or want to learn more about the Global Family Business Institute, how can they reach you?
Yeah. Well, my book is available on Amazon. It's called The Family Business Whisperer.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can be found at the Global Family Business Institute. Just Google Global Family Business Institute, Drucker School, and I'll pop right up.
Okay, great. And I didn't really give you a chance to answer the question, which is what is your book about? Give us the summary or Cliff Notes version.
It's all about preserving families and perpetuating businesses, and it's some anecdotal things, but it's also some stories around the importance of matriarchs. How to get the rising gen ready. So yeah, it's a number of different stories from real life families that hopefully is helpful.
Great. And they can find it on Amazon. It's called The Family Business Whisperer. Great. Dave, thanks so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
This podcast is sponsored by myself, Jonathan Goldhill, and my company, the Goldhill Group, where we provide coaching for growing companies. I'm Jonathan Goldhill, and my purpose is simple: to guide entrepreneurial leaders in family businesses towards more freedom and fulfillment. I want entrepreneurs to get clarity around the changes that will make them and their businesses more successful so they can experience the same freedom I've enjoyed in my life. Our proven practices challenge business owners to think differently about their business and how they're running it, and quite literally become game changers in our clients' companies. Learn more at thegoldhillgroup.com website, where you can schedule your free strategy session. Thank you for joining us on the Disruptive Successor Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, review, and share with a friend who would benefit from the message. If you're interested in picking up a copy of my book, Disruptive Successor, go to disruptivesuccessor.com.